Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Coming at you Monday night here with Will Miles, co-host there at Will Miles SEC. I just realized I didn't have I don't have the banners up, Will. I mean, I think people know who we are anyway, but I gotta put the names up there anyway. A little nice change, I guess. But I do things for the news station, so I have to take the what we call supers. Take the supers off and put them back in there. So there we go. But follow me at GatorDave_SEC. Will Miles at Will Miles SEC right there. And hey, this is gonna be a jam-packed episode here, Will.
Yeah, there's a little bit going on, even though even though the season's not over, but the regular season is over. We got a couple of weeks. Well, I don't know what, 11 days.
Yeah,
till the next game. So it is interesting. You got early signing day, like 2 days after you finish the regular season, and then immediately into portal, immediately into bowls, all that sort of stuff. It just, college football seems to do things in ways that don't make a whole lot of sense, but it's never boring. Like, there's always something going on. So kudos to them for giving us content.
There's never a dull moment.
Somebody might have said that in the past. I don't know who it was, but turns out that thing needs to be trademarked. Is I think what we're learning.
There we go. So Caleb Banks returning. We'll get into that. Transfer portal. We'll get into all that as well. For we haven't really discussed who's leaving Florida. We'll discuss some of the targets out there as well. Bowl game coming up with Tulane. We'll get into a bit as well, and then we'll take a look back at our over/under season predictions. All that good stuff right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. So everybody, hit that like button, subscribe right here on Gators Breakdown if you haven't done so yet. Like and subscribe right here on YouTube. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform as well. Really, really, really helps us out, everybody. Thanks for hopping in this episode. I think Monday nights are really, really busy in the Gator podcast world on YouTube. So Monday nights is, I think Gator Nation has it good out there. But Kimpo Karate saying, go Gators. Dragon Bushy, what's up? He says he's also from Dothan, Alabama. So there we go, from Alabama. Jay Casey says, go Gators. Castle Carolina Fishing also with a go Gators. Go Gators. Certainly ready to get to a busy episode here. So, let's get to the big news. And, of course, we're going to talk transfer portal here coming up. But if we go back 2 years ago, the Gators went and found Caleb Banks from Louisville. And on Monday, Caleb Banks announces he's returning for his senior season instead of going to the NFL. He wants to chase a national championship. He told Nick De La Torre of Florida Victorious. And let's put a statement up right here, Will. And he goes, it goes without saying that University of Florida football team means everything to me. It's not just a team. It's what I call family. The coaches pour their hearts into us day in and day out, and my teammates play with so much love, passion, and dedication, making it impossible not to love the Florida football program and the fans. He goes, and the fans, they're the best part of playing football. Their energy, unwavering support drive us as a team to be the best we can be. After the incredible season Gator Nation just witnessed, I'm more motivated than ever to see what's in store for next year and, more importantly, to be a part of it. With that being said, I'm excited to announce that I'll be continuing my career at the University of Florida for my final year of college football. As I prepare for this last lap, I'm ready to give it my all, achieve great things, and proudly represent Gator Nation. Now, from Caleb Banks, he shared on social media. So Banks, of course, his most productive collegiate season here, appearing in all 12 games for the Gators, 10 starts, 21 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, a recovered fumble as well. Of course, really excelled in those crucial games late in the season, LSU and Ole Miss. Against LSU, Banks dominated with game-high 3 quarterback hurries, a sack, 2 forced fumbles, helping that Gator defensive front record 7 sacks against LSU that had allowed 6 coming into that game. In Florida's final home game in the season against Ole Miss, Banks recorded 2.5 sacks, and that led that defensive front in that game to 9 tackles for loss against the Rebels, and he earned SEC Co-Defensive Lineman of the Week honors. So look at it, Will, Banks returning, the Gators. Look, it ensures that the defensive front won't consist of entirely newcomers here. It's pretty significant that with Florida's and that improved pass rush we saw, especially at the end of the season, it eliminates the need to go to the transfer portal, replace Banks, and or rely on young talent like DeAndre Robinson and Mekhi Burrow. So big news for the Gators on this Monday to kind of get the transfer portal season kicked off. As I said, 2 years ago you got him. Now you don't really have to go to the portal to replace Caleb Banks.
Yeah, it's funny. When I went back and looked at our over-unders, we always have a sack over-under. And one of the things that I was asking is, where's the pressure going to come from? And the pressure really came from Caleb Banks. And you cited the 7 tackles for loss and the 4.5 sacks, but he was much more effective than that. A lot of the sacks that Florida got were because of collapsed pockets, where then the quarterback had to shift off of his spot, and that allowed defensive ends to get in. So when you think about the overall impact that these guys were able to have, or that Banks was able to have, that's really a huge contribution that he's making there. Beyond that, I think it's interesting that if you look at Banks's last year, it wasn't really all that great. And then it took him sort of 2 years to develop in the program. That's significant from the standpoint of Banks really does need, or if you're going to have to replace a guy like Banks, replacing him means that you're going to, replacing him means that you'd probably have to find somebody in the transfer portal who's going to be just as productive. That's a difficult thing to do, and something that I think Florida would have struggled with. So a big deal to have him back.
Yeah, I mean, we know defensive linemen are hard to find, just in general, and then going into the transfer portal, and we'll talk about it in just a second, of having to get somebody in the trenches. It is pretty difficult, especially in the SEC. Somebody who can, we would need, for the hopes of next year, you need somebody who would step in and probably produce at the same level we saw Caleb Banks produce late in the season. So that would have been a hard ask for this staff to go out there and find somebody who did the things that we saw Caleb Banks do in the last, those last 2 big games of the season. Injured versus Florida State, so didn't get to play a whole lot. But when Florida really needed somebody to step up, Will, I mean, no, don't get me wrong, he wasn't the only one on that defensive line stepping up, but certainly one of the main cogs of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Banks, especially in the LSU game, the Ole Miss game, those were games where we said the defense is going to have to get some stops. And with Lagway being limited in terms of what he could do, they needed the defense to step up. And, Banks was sort of the key of the explosive play on the defensive side of the ball. I've said this a few times now, that he was involved in getting explosives on the defensive side, while Lagway was involved in getting the explosives on the offensive side of the ball. And so it's not necessarily that Florida was all that great at preventing yardage. It was that they could play that bend but don't break style, because Banks was making so many big plays. Now, the forced fumbles and those sorts of things, those tend to be sort of luck-oriented type of things. And so to believe that that's going to cascade into next year, I think, is probably a little bit of wishful thinking. But the question I have is, in the Miami game, in the A&M game, in the Tennessee game, Banks wasn't necessarily the force that he was later in the year. The question for 2025 will be, can he be a force all the way throughout the year? Because obviously that would be great for Florida if he can start out causing havoc against Miami day one.
Yeah. So that game would be early in the season, of course. There, not the first game next year. Will, thankfully, with the Long Island Ice Tears, I think Florida's playing the first game next season. So we got that weird schedule next year. But certainly that's what you're looking for, Will. I think, going to your point, you want to start next year, Banks, to use what we've seen late in the season as a foundation. But the thought was, you read articles out there, he shunned the NFL to come back. It wasn't transfer portal or not to come back to Florida. It was not going to the NFL for Caleb Banks and coming back for Florida. So who knows? I know in that interview with Nick De La Torre, he also said talking to Lagway was a big part of coming back, and talking to him and say, hey, come back next year, going to be a first-round pick. Not. Well, I don't know where he was graded. I'm sure if he was a first-round pick, he probably would have packed his bags and go on. And hey, more power to him. But was getting some NFL draft love, but decided to come back to Florida.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is the power of NIL in some capacity as well, right?
Yeah.
That you're no longer you're no longer stupid if you don't go to the NFL draft, where if you have an opportunity to be a second round or a third round pick, you're turning down money that you can't get at the college level. Well, now look, second, third, fourth round picks, the money is probably pretty close to equivalent when you think about what a guy of Banks' ilk can get. And I'm sure there was some sort of NIL negotiation going on, because there's NIL negotiations going on with everybody, right? And guys who excelled are going to get rewarded, and guys who struggled are going to try to find greener pastures someplace else. That's just sort of the way it is. And so good for Banks to be able to execute like that. And then, hopefully Florida will be able to reap the rewards next year of him staying. And, certainly when we talk about Florida having an NIL war chest, given some of the stuff that's gone on around Napier, we're obviously talking about the recruiting class. We're talking about the transfer portal, but part of the transfer portal is keeping the guys you want to keep. And Caleb Banks was a guy Florida clearly wanted to keep. So good thing all the way around that he's going to remain a Gator.
Absolutely. So, Will, you brought it up there, and we would, like I said, jam-packed episode of Gators Breakdown. So we would now move on. Like we said, everything we needed to say there. And now moving on to transfer portal. And look, with the announcement, Florida, Tulane in the Gasparilla Bowl, that game being next Friday. Well, for Florida, it's going to make a lot of sense for Florida to do a lot of hosting this week for the transfer portal. So starting this weekend, early next week, I think you'll be seeing heavy number of visits there for the Gators. Calls won't be on campus most of next week due to being in Tampa for the bowl game. So wide receiver, that's the position being talked about the most right here for the transfer portal. I remember going back a year ago and last year being told that we had so many young, good wide receivers on the roster that we didn't need to hit the transfer portal. And then we went and got Chimere DK and Elijah Badger, and I think we saw the results of that one. Florida needed to hit the transfer portal last year for wide receivers. So glad they did, and got some really, really good production. Added the two transfers to come in and lead the Gators at that position. Difference makers at the position are DK and Badger. So with those guys gone, though, Andy Jean entering the portal, Florida will look for 2-3 guys to bring in here. And more than likely, and kind of just specifying the big body at the spot here. So we'll go through a few names here at the wide receiver spot. Nick Anderson, transfer Oklahoma, missed time this season due to injury, but was very productive in year one in Norman. In 2023, he caught 31 passes, 798 yards, 10 touchdowns. 24/7 Sports ranks the 6'4", 216-pound Anderson as the transfer portal's number 5 overall prospect right now and the number 2 wide receiver as of Monday afternoon. So a big target there at the wide receiver spot. Here on Monday, of course, this is when the transfer portal opened. We started getting a whole bunch of names. Reggie Virgil, he's received an offer from Florida. 6'4" wide receiver, transfer from Miami of Ohio, coming off a breakout campaign in which he recorded 816 yards, 9 touchdowns on 41 catches. He's from the Mount Dora area, which, of course, is around Orlando, Gainesville. So Gators could give him an opportunity to return close to home. FSU has also offered. Chase Sowell, 6'4", sophomore. Hey, you notice the trend here. 6'4", sophomore, 34 catches, 678 yards last season at East Carolina. He's been productive in his 2 years at ECU. 79 passes caught for 1,300 yards, 4 touchdowns. Both his parents played sports at the University of Florida. Eric Rivers, junior in 2024. Rivers took a medical redshirt in 2022 before transferring from Memphis to FIU. He had a decent debut in 2023, hauling in 32 passes for 343 yards, 2 touchdowns, before exploding this past season, especially down the stretch. Rivers caught 62 passes for 12 touchdowns and over 1,100 yards. That included at least 1 touchdown in 7 of 8 Conference USA games. As I mentioned, played great down the stretch. He had 30 catches for 591 yards and 7 touchdowns in the final 4 games for the Panthers. Doesn't have great size now. This one's a little bit different. 5'11", 175, but operated outside, one of the country's best deep threats. He racked up 637 yards on targets more than 20 yards down the field, third best in the country. Familiar name from last year, C.J. Daniels from LSU. I know there were reports of interest there. Not so sure about the interest on Florida side. Was a big fan of his last transfer cycle, a year ago, but he went to LSU instead. Limited season, dealing with injury. So we'll see if any more enter, but Nick Marsh at Michigan State is one that hasn't entered yet that we know of. Heard there might be interest in him if he does. Wide receiver Eric Singleton at Georgia Tech. Talented receiver, apparently has interest in Florida. Caught 56 passes for 754 yards this season. Seems like Georgia has an early lead there. Maybe the same for Dane Key from Kentucky. And then Caleb Odom at Bama, former on-3 5-star tight end. He played receiver for the Crimson Tide this past season. 7 catches, 65 yards. And then Nitro Tuggle at Georgia. He enters the portal as well. Appeared in 7 games for Georgia this season. 3 passes, 34 yards, 2 catches in the Tennessee game. So for 25 yards, he's 6'2", 195 pounds. So, Will, as I said, getting into the list here, a lot of options early on in the transfer portal for the Gators. Clearly, and as we know this roster, Florida going for some size and some deep downfield threats.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Lagway and you think about where his strengths lie, it's obviously the deep shots. And then if you think about where you would want to see improvement, I would say you'd want to see improvement in the red zone. So anybody that you can get that you can make those back shoulder throws in the red zone and use a guy who's 6'4", 6'5", and, Lagway is going to be able to put the ball there. The question is, do you have the guy who can go up and get it? And I think Florida, in many ways, if you look at some of the weaknesses of DJ Lagway, quote unquote weaknesses, Florida stalled in the red zone quite a bit when he was in charge. There was a lot of explosives. The last couple of games, they got a little bit more consistent in the red zone, but Florida struggled a little bit in the red zone. And so you look at that and say, how can we supplement that? And it's a big guy on the outside who can catch back shoulder passes and who can make it easy when you get the one-on-one matchups. Lagway exploits those one-on-one matchups better, just about as well as anybody in the country. And so once you sort of see that as a coach, I can understand why you'd go out and you'd say, hey, how do we get more of that? How do we bring people in who are going to be able to accentuate that? But I think the big thing is that there are going to be guys who want to come play for Lagway or play with Lagway. And so there's going to be folks who come in through the portal. But I think also if you think about who's already on the Florida roster, Trey Wilson's going to be back from injury this year. And then you've also got guys like Mizell and Marcus Burke and guys who've done something this year who are also going to have some opportunities to step in there. And so I'm not that worried about the wide receiver position. I know everybody gets excited about the wide receiver position, but I think when you got a quarterback who's as gifted as Lagway, the thing I'm concerned about is on the defense. So when you start talking about Banks staying and who else Florida's going to bring on the defense, those are really the places that I'm focused. The wide receiver is kind of the bells and whistles and the cherry on top in many ways for this team, because I think Florida's going to have a top 10 offense because of the players they'll be able to bring in at wide receiver, but also, like you said, because of some of the guys they have on the roster. But certainly, Gene leaving is indicative that they're going to go out and get some guys to replace him on the roster. And honestly, that's kind of what you've seen so far from the guys who've left the program already, because those are guys who weren't getting major playing time. Hopefully they can go someplace else and get major playing time someplace else. And then hopefully as well, Florida will be able to upgrade at each of those positions as they have the opportunity.
Yeah, we'll get into that list before we move on too. But, Will, it's easy for me if you're a transfer portal wide receiver. Ricky Pearsall, Chimere Dike, Elijah Badger. This is what transfer wide receivers have done the last couple of years at the University of Florida. One first-round pick in Ricky Pearsall. The other 2 guys have, really shown that they're worth, taking another step in their careers by coming to Florida. And who knows what the numbers would have been like if they had, had the DJ Lagway production all season long. But, those guys really had to step up. Trey Wilson goes out with injury. Get plenty of more opportunities as well. But that's something else. If I'm a transfer portal wide receiver, I think if I'm Florida, I'm sure they're going to be doing that. But hey, look what we've done the last couple of years at that spot by bringing transfers in and those guys being integral parts and producing right away in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder about some of the guys, the 5-star guys they've missed on, right? Especially this past cycle when you had Dallas Wilson and Jamie French. And look, I get it. Texas is a good program and Oregon's a good program. But, you think about what Florida's been able to do under Billy Gonzalez in all of his in all of his tenures there at Florida. It's not just the guys recently. There's been a lot of development at that position with this particular coach over an extended period of time. And you would think that would be attractive to really anybody who has the opportunity to come into Gainesville.
Well, to your point, Will, Van Jefferson, another transfer.
Trevon Grimes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as though the wide receivers haven't been successful when they've transferred into Florida. And there has been one sort of, overarching constant when it comes to those guys. And I think, look, I mean, DK and Badger, I think I even tweeted during either the Ole Miss game or the Florida State game that DJ Lagway had made Elijah Badger an awful lot of money, but Elijah Badger made Elijah Badger a lot of money, right? He was open deep a lot and very consistent. I can't remember him dropping a ball. Just getting guys and DK doesn't drop anything. And so you get those two guys out there who are really, really consistent. You get guys who can make some acrobatic catches. I think, hands is something that I would really be looking for because, Lagway is going to put it around them. And so then it's a question of, can they go get it on some of those deep throws that he's going to make? Because as much fun as it is to watch him just drop the ball in like it's a handoff time after time after time, at some point the guy's going to miss by like a foot or two, and you're going to need the guy to go get it. And so I think having bringing in guys who have the hands to be able to handle that will be a big part of it as well. So
I rewatched it last night. The downfield throw to DK, his last big explosive play. That DK had to stretch out to get that ball. So going to your point, guys who can make plays down the field as well when it's just not thrown in the breadbasket.
Yeah, I mean, look, the other thing is wide receivers project pretty easily. Like once you've seen a guy play at the college level on the field, you kind of know what he's got. Yeah. And I think we kind of ignored that when Justin Shorter came in from Penn State. And it's not that he was a bad player, but it was clear that he wasn't going to like reach the potential of his 5-star rating once you sort of saw him play for a little bit. And I do think wide receiver, because it's so speed based, because it's so if you run good routes and you're not lazy and you've got and you've got afterburners, it's pretty easy to say, okay, that guy's going to be good. I think the challenging positions to think about are like defensive tackle, offensive line, maybe even linebacker in some capacity. Like, there it becomes a little bit more technique over skill. And so maybe it's a little bit more difficult to project what's going to happen in the portal. So that's the other aspect of this, right? As you see a guy like Badger who had caught 60 balls a year for the past 2 years at Arizona State, that kind of production can't be faked. And so you bring him into Florida, and whether it was Mertz or whether it was Lagway, if DK or if Badger was open, he was going to get the ball. And it just so happened that he got the ball a little bit more when DJ Lagway was the quarterback. That's because a lot of times his responsibility was to run deep. And we all know DJ Lagway is going to take that shot. So, that's the thing that would excite me. I mean, God, I'm up here in Philadelphia, and the Eagles won yesterday, and they're already yapping at each other because Jalen Hurts isn't taking deep shots to AJ Brown. Like, you're not going to have to yap at DJ Lagway if you're the guy running the deep route. Like, you're not going to if you're open. In fact, I suspect even if you may not be open, he might let it go. And you're going to be rewarded for running down the field. It's not just going to be wind sprints all night while you wait for a check down 3 yards from the line of scrimmage. So. He's going to make somebody an awful lot of money at the wide receiver position. We'll see, both because they're coming in under the NIL auspices in college, but also because I think he's going to be able to allow people to showcase their wares. And if I'm Florida, that's what I'm selling. I'm selling, you're going to be able to come in here and you're going to be able to show the NFL what you got. And, when you average almost 25 yards a catch or whatever it was that Badger averaged, people are going to take a second look, right? And maybe he goes and runs a 40 and it's going to be kind of slow. And, maybe he won't do great in like shuffle drills and things like that. But at the end of the day, someone's still going to look at that and go, yeah, but he's been really productive. And that productivity is something that I think you'll be able to sell because, look, Florida's going to air it out, right? I think next year – Napier's going to always want to run the ball, but I think you sort of saw it those last 3 games where there's a willingness to throw it on second and long. They did deviate from some of the tendencies that we've seen in the past where you get an incompletion on first down and then you run the ball on second to try to get to like 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6 and something manageable. With Lagway, there's not a whole lot of benefit to doing that because he can get you the 10 if you need to. And so there were multiple drives where they just threw, and maybe it was a 3 and out this year, but I think next year it's not necessarily going to be, and the receivers are really going to get highlighted.
Yeah, a lot of those choices there. I have a chance to go look at it, but I do know those guys were known for catching the ball down the field as well. So you could clearly tell what they're targeting there at the wide receiver group. So moving forward, just some other names that really jump off the page here for the Gators in what we have learned on this Monday. Kentucky defensive lineman Keyshawn Silver, formerly of North Carolina as well. He's in the portal. Matt Zenitz of 24/7 Sports reports that the 6'4", 335-pound former 5-star should be locking in visits in the near future. A source tells CBS Sports 24/7 Sports that the coveted Kentucky defensive lineman transfer Silver is focusing on 4 schools as transfer options: Florida, Miami, Michigan, and USC. Silver is ranked as the number 31 overall player in the transfer portal right now and the number 2 defensive lineman per the On3 industry transfer portal rankings at the time that we or that I made the notes there. In 12 games this season, Silver recorded 26 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 tackle for loss, an improvement from his first season with the Wildcats, where he had 17 tackles, totaling 43 tackles altogether, 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss in Lexington. Kentucky was considered one of the SEC's top defensive line units throughout the year. Silver certainly played a big role. And, of course, not the first time, as I said, because he's going through the transfer portal process, began his career at North Carolina as he signed with the Tar Heels out of high school, spent 2 years there before moving to Kentucky. So Silver played high school at Rocky Mount, North Carolina, where he was a 5-star prospect. So being able, kind of going full circle with the beginning of the episode here, Will, if you can bring him in and pair him with Caleb Banks, with Cam Jackson on his way out, Des Watson on the way out as well, would be such a big move for this Gators defense. A gap eater in the middle, a position that's hard to fill in the portal, so it'll be a great get for what Florida loses in Jackson and Watson, but probably going to come with a hefty price tag, going back to the NIL part of this, given that that position's so rare to hit in the transfer portal, especially with somebody with the pedigree of Silver here. You heard other big programs going to be in the running here. Highly ranked defensive linemen in the transfer portal. Certainly going to be a huge target. So that's just the 4 schools right now. No telling who else comes up and tries to get Silver on campus.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else in the world, right? I mean, if you want the best, you got to go pay for it, and that's really where it boils down to in college football now. Is that if you want the best players, you're going to have to pay for it, and Florida's going to have to do that if they want this guy or if they want other guys on the defensive side of the ball. But like I said, I mean, the wide receivers get the headlines and they're the ornamental guys, but the crux of what Florida is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you think about LSU a couple years ago with Jaden Daniels, Heisman-level quarterback, guy wins the Heisman Trophy and quite honestly ran away with it. And they go 10-3 because they can't stop anybody. You think about Florida earlier this year, giving up 41 points to Miami, not being able to stop Texas A&M in the first half, even giving up a bunch of points to Mississippi State, certainly against Texas, not being able to get stops. And, that's not going to fly in 2025 if Florida wants to go to the playoff, because we did learn this weekend that if you're in the SEC, you probably only ought to lose 2 games if you want to be in the playoff, which means you got to go 10-2 next year in order to get in, and it's a far ride from 7-5 to 10-2, and quite honestly, the ride is on the defensive side of the ball. Like Florida's turnaround in the second half of the season, in many ways, was because Lagway could put up points quickly, and he did it in sort of clutch situations. But one of the reasons he had the opportunity to do it in clutch situations is the Florida defense was stopping the opposition and making them punt and giving Lagway multiple opportunities to do it. And so, that's going to be the key to everything in the offseason. Like, we can talk about the offense. I'm sure that our magazine will have a giant breakdown on Lagway. I'm sure that that's what we'll be talking about all off season long. But the reality is that the Florida defense was sort of middle of the road this year, even when you factor in how much better they were on the backside. And so, it's just one of those things where Florida is going to have to improve significantly on that side, and getting these transfers specifically on the defensive line is going to be key to getting that done. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, there's a lot of names we can go through. We can spend the whole episode on transfer portal, but that would be kind of boring to me. One more name I'll throw out, Zachariah Poyser. Sources tell Gators Online that there's mutual interest in the safety from Jacksonville State. 6'2", 190-pound, entered the transfer portal Monday. He finished the 2024 season, his redshirt freshman season, 47 solo tackles, 3 interceptions, 8 tackles for loss. Grew up right outside of Gainesville in Wildwood, Florida. Once high school teammates with Vernell Brown III at Wildwood High before he transferred to Orlando Jones. There's a connection there. Will, after this episode, go watch his tape. I don't care if he's from Jacksonville State. He stands out on the field. Huge kid, will attack, not afraid of the ball, makes plays on the ball as well. That's one I wouldn't mind. We talked about the safety spot for Florida being, talking about this defense here, one of the more sore spots of this defense. Poyser here, go watch his tape, guys. I think you'll be satisfied a good bit. And
Yeah,
and that's another thing about the transfer portal. Before I interrupt you there, it can't be just about guys who played at big programs, and you're going to have those guys that come from the smaller tiers and work their way up. And look, I know it's a crapshoot. We saw Florida do it with DJ Douglas from Tulane, and it didn't turn out too well for Florida. But look, don't compare the tapes. Don't compare the stats when you want to go and look at, what Poyser did and somebody like DJ Douglas. But, it is, certainly an interesting angle about this of how do you value guys who are coming from the lower programs up to a program like the SEC?
Sure. I actually disagree a little bit. So what Florida wound up doing at the safety position is they stacked guys. And we talk about that a lot when it comes to recruiting, is you want to stack guys. So, Bill Sykes wrote a great article for Read and Reaction a couple of years ago about the offensive line and said, oh, you got to stack 4 offensive linemen every class. Like, that's how teams like Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, some of those other SEC teams make sure that they're always strong up front. And I think it's like what Florida did last year. Yeah, DJ Douglas didn't work out very well. Neither did Asa Turner. But Triquez Bridges worked out great.
Yep.
And so I think in many ways
he came from Oregon. He came from Big
well, but again, if we're going to look at guys from lower divisions, look, Joey Slackman was not a huge difference maker inside for the Gators this year, certainly coming from Penn, coming from a very, very much lower division school. And so you have to project, obviously. You hope that people jump out on the tape. You hope that translates, but you can't always guarantee it.
Right.
And so I think if Florida is going to go heavy, if Florida decides that they need to be better at safety, and I think you and I both think they need to be better at safety, then it's not good enough to just go get one guy in the portal. Maybe you got to spend a lot to get a guy there, but you also need to have those guys who are sort of backup plans on the back end. And, look, I think Florida expected coming into the season that it was going to be Jordan Castell and Asa Turner, and that DJ Douglas was going to be sort of the backup, and that Triquez Bridges was going to sort of split based on injuries. And by the time he got to the end of the season, not only was Triquez Bridges not a safety, he was starting cornerback.
And played really well.
Yeah. So honestly, if you think about the Florida defensive turnaround, Caleb Banks gets a lot of credit for that. And I think the defensive line gets a lot of credit for that. Certainly Pup Howard and Jaden Robinson played very well at the linebacker position. But the tackles that were being made on the outside were being made by Triquez Bridges. And so those are the things that I'm sort of looking for, is not necessarily just that Florida gets the guy they're going after first, though obviously we'll talk about it here. And I think you're more likely to get success from the guy that you've targeted and decided to go after and put the NIL deal in place. But if we've seen anything the last couple of years, it's that injuries in the SEC just play an enormous role in terms of how teams are able to deliver and how successful they can be along the way. And so, Florida's defensive backfield, in many ways, the injuries sort of brought the cream to the top. And we'll see what happens there this year. But no, I agree with you. Go watch the safety. He's interesting. And I think the translation is going to be different. Like, I wouldn't say just because Slackman didn't turn into a star, means you shouldn't go after someone else from a lower division school.
Well, I was looking at the answer is that too. Montrell Johnson, Osiris Torrance, Cam Jackson, Memphis, a little higher than that, but still, making the jump to Power 4, Power 5 conference and being pretty good players.
I mean, look, you've got more data points because you've seen these guys, but it's still recruiting. I mean, it's still the idea that I want every 5-star that I can get because I know that historically 5-stars have worked out at like a 65 or a 70% clip. But that still means that 30 or 35% of the time those guys don't work out. And so I think what you end up with when you go in the transfer portal is probably something where you kind of know what you're getting, but you're more likely to be right. So if you think about like Antonio Valentino and Daquan Newkirk, who got brought in a couple years ago at defensive tackle, those were guys who we looked at and said, hey, maybe they take a step forward, but they've got sort of a baseline of play. Like we've seen them play in the SEC when it comes to Newkirk. And you know, these are guys who played Power 4, Power 5 football at the time. And so we sort of know what we're going to get out of those guys. Now, none of them took a major step forward, but we got, I mean, in my mind, we kind of got exactly what those guys had provided before. You're going to see that in some capacity. But if you go after a guy who jumps off the film from a lower level, you've got the potential of getting delivery above what you might get going after. Like if Florida went after a safety in the SEC who wanted to transfer, like if it was somebody who'd sort of played, they were okay. Like, the floor is they'll be okay on your team. The ceiling is they take a step forward. I think the danger in going to somebody at a lower level is, you know, maybe the lower level is what was making him look better. But the benefit to going to a lower level is, one, maybe it doesn't cost you as much, but also the second part is maybe that person turns into a star. And you're not necessarily, I think one of the things that we're going to probably end up realizing over time is that if you're looking for a guy for a year, the number of stars, like the number of guys who are going to come in and like be like a Jonathan Grenard and who are going to like just change the way the offense has to prepare against you is probably pretty limited. And I don't know that you're going to hit on those guys all the time. So if a guy from a lower level gives you an opportunity to hit like that, it's worth the roster spot, even if it turns out he doesn't pan out.
Well, here's the thing. On that note, the current top-rated safety in the transfer portal, CJ Hurd from FAU. So, I mean, there you go. So, you know, the level is not mattering there. He 73 tackles and a forced fumble this past season as a freshman at FAU in the state. Maybe he doesn't have to go far. One more former 4-star recruit just completed his first season at Maryland. Safety Brandon Jacob recorded. There at Maryland. So, you know, there you go. You got kind of variety there at the safety spot. Power 4 level, Power 5 level, and but below. But two of the better ones, not in the Power 4, Power 5. So interesting to see how it will turn out there. So first time we're getting together some expected departures for the Gators here. Defensive lineman Justice Boone and Kelby Collins to go along with Arlis Boardingham, probably the biggest name there, the biggest contributor so far besides Justice Boone. Boardingham being the biggest contributor on offense, Boone on defense, Jakeem Jackson at corner, Quincy Ivory at edge, Andy Jean at wide receiver, Deuce Spurlock at linebacker, and then offensive lineman Christian Williams and Mike Williams as well. As I said, you know, Boardingham didn't necessarily take that jump I thought many expected to take this year. I expected him to take that jump this year. By the time the end of the year had rolled around, Livingston was getting more of the snaps there at the tight end spot. Hayden Hansen did take his necessary steps, I thought, this year. But whatever reason, you know, Arlis Boardingham never took that next step this year. Certainly made some exciting plays, you know, last year, especially in that South Carolina game on the road where Florida gets that win in the comeback fashion. And then Justice Boone, just made it seem like he couldn't really get over that injury that he suffered from last year. You know, the defensive line is playing well. We've talked about that this episode with Caleb Banks and, you know, of course, Tyreek Sapp and Jack Pyburn up front too, and other defensive lineman Cam Jackson. But, you know, Boone was supposed to be part of that, you know, starts the season as a starter. But as the season progressed, snaps lessened. You didn't see him on the field a whole lot. 6'4", 266 pounds, 37 tackles, 2 sacks at Florida. As I said, missed all of 2023 with that ACL. He just never really bounced back from. And then, of course, as far as potential goes, Kelby Collins, I know when we go do our season predictions, you know, he was one of my breakout players I put there. And that certainly did not turn out. Of course, he had a position change. I thought it would be a slow change, but eventually that it would just click, but it never did for Kelby Collins. So he's probably the biggest name besides Andy Jean out of all this as far as potential for players, but then guys who got playing time in Arlis Sportingham, Justice Boone, kind of going back to your point earlier, not huge losses so far out of the transfer portal for the Gators.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, back before NIL and all those sorts of things, there was all sorts of controversy about gray shirts, where coaches sort of would oversign and then would have guys who were sort of on a ghost roster so that they could make all their numbers work right. And people would get all upset that guys would get forced out. Now it's just the way it works, right? Like the reality is that guys like Kelby Collins, guys like Justice Boone, are going to get opportunities to shine someplace else in a way that they weren't going to get in Gainesville. And Billy Napier seems like a very upstanding guy when it comes to that sort of stuff. His players all seem to love him. And I think in many ways, his ability to shake their hand and say, go get a gig someplace else, but it ain't going to be here, is probably a useful thing. And there are roster limits in college football at this point. I think, what is it, like 105, something like that in terms of roster limits. And Florida's got a brand new recruiting class coming in. Florida's going to go out and get a bunch of guys from the transfer portal. Certainly you got a bunch of guys graduating as well. But when you start thinking about roster management, the old term was processing guys out. That's what this really is, right? Like, if there are guys who leave who you want, that's when it becomes problematic. So like last year when ETN decided to leave, that was problematic because you knew Florida wanted ETN and it sort of put on the full court press to keep him here. And it doesn't look like there's any of that going on at Florida. In fact, Banks is a guy that you look at and say they probably put the full court press and were successful in keeping him there. So yeah, I mean, look, I would love to see Kelby Collins, or would have loved to have seen him take off in a Gator uniform. Certainly, Justice Boone looked like he was about to break out before the knee injury, but those usually things take a couple of years to really get over. And you think about a guy like LJ McCray, who really started to step up towards the end of the year, got a lot more snaps. And the reality is McCray is just a guy who Florida's going to have to put in there and get a ton out of. And if he's already outperforming Boone, then there just wasn't a starting spot available. So when you think about the guys who are leaving, I think that's the thing you kind of have to keep in mind is, is it somebody who was really logging quality minutes for Florida, and especially on the defensive side of the ball? Because with as much struggle as Florida had on that side, if you weren't able to differentiate yourself, then it probably means that it's best to move on, and it's probably best for both parties, right? It's best for guys like Kelby Collins to be able to go out and have a fresh start someplace else, but it's also good for Florida to be able to bring in some of these transfers we're talking about and fill those roster spots with guys who at least are going to compete for a spot, because by the time the end of the season came, it was pretty clear those guys weren't going to be competing next year.
So there are sure to be more this week, and will probably be some names that surprise, going to Will's point there. Look, I think that's going to be for almost every college football team. There's going to be names you don't really expect, guys who probably have produced a good bit at some point. Nature of the sport right now, so we'll be following along. But yeah, that those won't be the only names. Exit meetings happen on the Monday, so we'll see what the rest of the week holds for the Gators and the transfer portal. Giveth and taketh is the saying out there right now. So, Will, quickly, before we get to over-unders, your thoughts quickly on Tulane and the Gasparilla Bowl. I mean, I know for you, Gasparilla Bowl, that was the wish you got.
Yeah, so we haven't told Max yet because I'm still in negotiations about when we can get there and whether I'm going to be rolling in right at the game and whether I need to buy a ticket for my mother-in-law to go along with me. But those things are all in flux. But yeah, I'm excited about that one. It's funny. I get to go down for one game every year, and it's unusual that I would get to see a second one. And this one's a little bit, the quarterback for Tulane announced he's going to the transfer portal. They had some other guys who have announced as well. And so, how exciting will it be? But, it turns out when you get to a game with your kid, it doesn't really matter what the situation is on the field. Like, he's just sitting there munching on cotton candy, having a great time, screaming, "Move back, you suck." He was doing that the other day we were watching some other game and somebody got a penalty. He started screaming it. And I was like, oh boy. Oh boy, like
That's awesome.
we've turned him. So so like I said, we haven't let him know yet because he's already been invited to 2 different tailgates, and he would be excited if I told him that's already happened. But he needs to.
Harmonic Woods will be there.
That's one of them. Yep. So he needs to concentrate on school for the next week before we go down. So we won't tell him yet. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm excited about the game. I think Tulane 9-4 overall in the year. Haven't really played anybody, so that's one of those things where you know who exactly is this that we're getting in there. But I think the bigger thing here, and this has always been the case, is that the bowl practices for a young team are important. And I know you're not going to get in your full allotment of 15 and all those sorts of things, but you know the reality is that as much as we've talked about DJ Lagway and how good he is, there are steps for him to take. And so getting him healthy, getting him to where he can move around on that hamstring. We've seen what happens when he's a starter and he's fully healthy. I mean, he just eviscerated Samford and Kentucky as a starter. And I'm actually kind of curious to see what happens, assuming that his hamstring's fully healed when he goes out there. You know, do they have more of those, you know, RPO read option? Have they incorporated more of the quarterback run back into the game plan? And if they do, does that free him up to be even more explosive? Because the reality is that when the quarterback starts moving around back there, the windows get bigger. And if you give DJ Lagway bigger windows, oh boy, like I'm excited to see what happens. So, you know, look, I mean, Raymond James Stadium, going to be a beautiful day in Florida. I'm going to be there with my kids, so can't ask for much more, man, other than maybe a 50-point win. So hopefully Napier can, like, you know, really put his foot on their throat and send the Gators 2024 season out in style.
Yeah, I put the poll up this morning. Thoughts on Florida playing Tulane in the Gasparilla Bowl at about 2,200 votes. 66% say they like it. About 34% say they don't like it. So a lot of the conversation was there. Hey, we get to see our team play again. That's the main thing for me. You get to see an extra game for these Gators. So 13th game of the season. Yeah, the opponent not the greatest, of course, and I'll get into that too before we move on there with Tulane. But also being in Tampa, that was a plus. But the other side of that was the 3:30 kickoff time on a Friday. A lot of people did not like, so that was another side of it. But that was pretty much the gist I got out of all the comments being there. But as I said, 66% say they like it. So as Will mentioned, Darian Mensah to enter the portal. That's Tulane's starting quarterback. Looks like former 5-star Ty Thompson will get the nod for Tulane. And then the linebacker Fobbs White plans to enter the transfer portal for Tulane, so they'll be missing him. 6'3", 230-pound edge, total 24 tackles, 5 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles. He started the last 8 games this season for the Green Wave, so he won't be on the field. Cornerback Rayshon Pleasant plans to enter the portal as well from Tulane. Recorded 35 tackles, 3 touchdowns this season, 2 of those being a kickoff return for a touchdown and 1 interception return for a touchdown. And also, defensive lineman Parker Peterson is expected to enter the portal from Tulane. Posted 21 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks this season. Was one of the top interior defensive linemen in the American Conference, says Chris Hummer of 24/7 Sports. So Tulane, about few names there already. Big impact. There's big impact for that team not playing in the bowl game. So
are any of those guys on defense and people Florida's interested in? Like, let's bring them onto the sideline.
Yeah, not sure. There was we pointed out in yesterday's episode, Cam Carroll, DJ Douglas, Chapman, the defensive line coach for the Gators, some Tulane connections there for the Gators.
I heard kickoff return for touchdown and got excited. It's been a long time since, DeBose maybe? Is that the last time? I know that Marcus Robinson almost took one back against LSU.
Man, I could look it up, but when was the last time?
Seriously, like when's the last time?
DeBose against Ohio State in the Gator Bowl?
I mean, geez,
that was his last game, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been forever. So it used to be Florida just got the Brandon Jameses of the world out there, and you didn't want to kick to him. I mean, Kadarius Toney might have had one at some point along the way, though he was usually like just getting surrounded, breaking a few guys' ACLs, and then
Swain has some punt returns for a touchdown, I think.
Yeah. Okay, there might have been a couple other guys,
Yeah,
but
but you said kickoff. I'm trying to remember the last kickoff. Yeah, I mean you don't. Yeah.
The point is that was a corner with 3 touchdowns, Dave. I'm just sitting there going, wait, a corner with 3 touchdowns? Like,
Yeah.
I'm interested. I'm interested.
There we go. Good stuff. So, yeah, we got about a week and a half for that game there for the Gators and Tulane. So, all right, let's get to over-under season predictions that we had at the beginning of the season. We went by 12 games. The Gators have played 12 games here. As we said, the schedule came into play. Very tough schedule for the Gators. Only one cupcake. Kind of broke it down as there would be plenty of snaps in 12 games for the Gators. Of course, did not account for Graham Mertz getting hurt. So that's where a lot of my numbers are going to kind of fall short. But there was the first one we started off with, Will, was 25 passing touchdowns for Graham Mertz. He had 20 in 11 games last season. I went with the over of 27. He had 6, of course. Like I said, I can't forecast for injuries there, but I predicted he would have 27 before he got hurt.
Well, I got an awful lot of crap for this over-under episode because I was anti-Mertz, and my thought process was that they were going to ask me to go downfield more often, and then it was possible the noise was going to get pretty loud early, and that we were going to see a lot of DJ Lagway. And obviously, you don't want that to happen because of injury, but that is what happened. And so I had taken the under on that one, and more than anything, because everything kind of went right in 2023, and he wound up with 20 touchdowns in 11 games. Really, I mean, nothing went right for Mertz from the start. Gets the concussion against Miami, is out against Samford. Lagway goes out and throws for 5,000 yards against the Bulldogs, and all of a sudden the noise is at a fever pitch. But so that was one. I had the under, so I did pretty well on the offensive side. Defense, we'll see, but
there we go. So I missed that one. Like I said, injuries are going to throw me here. 3,000 yards passing from. So I think we had Mertz and Lagway combined, if I remember right, for that one.
No. You had it for Mertz on this one, but
no. I was about to say I was going to go over it anyway, but I think I was combining both of those. Mertz in 11 games last season, 2,900 yards. So like I said, I went with the over. Mertz and Lagway this season combined to go for 2,629. So both go the under there. Would have been interesting to see if Lagway had played. Starting with that Samford game, as you said, what the numbers would have been. But I was picking it anyway, so I wouldn't have. Probably wouldn't have happened, but definitely didn't happen with Mertz being out.
Now, I took the under on this one mainly because I thought if Mertz played all 12 games, he might get there. But you think about last year, he got injured in that one, 2,900 yards. The two quarterbacks might have gotten there if Lagway hadn't gotten hurt, right? I mean, the Aiden Warner experience there for a game in 3 quarters really sort of drags down all of the Florida stats over the course of the year. But this is
26, 29. Yeah, you're right. They could have. I mean, that was 2 good defenses there with Georgia and Texas as well.
Yeah, but I mean, Lagway was already shredding them there in that first quarter, so it was entirely possible that Florida was going to be able to put up some big time yards. I mean, obviously would have had to have had 2 good games, but I don't think there's anybody out there who thinks DJ Lagway wouldn't have played better against Texas than what we saw out on the field. So anyway, I had the under on that one.
Yep. Okay. Lagway 5 touchdowns responsible for. As I said, I threw this one in there because just not thinking he would start as many games as he did. But I did go over there anyway, saying, I think you get 2 in a game against Samford. So as they get a good bit of snaps in that game, more than 3 the rest of the way. So I said, I think I would go with 7. So I put him over with 7. He had totaled 11. And to the surprise, Will, I don't know if I really didn't realize this until I was looking at it. No rushing touchdowns for DJ Lagway this year. All of them were passing touchdowns.
He's like the anti-Jalen Hurts. Like he throws the ball to the 1 yard line and then immediately sets up a touchdown for Jaden Ball.
Yeah.
This one was almost in danger from the game with Ball where he kept getting the ball down there, and then against Kentucky, where Ball has the 5 touchdowns because he was able to punch it in every time. But now I actually have written down for this one. I said, I suspect Lagway may hit 5 just in the Samford game alone, given what some Florida quarterbacks have done to the Bulldogs. And I even didn't think he was going to play the whole game. I just, Emory Jones lit them up, and he lit them up too. So I had taken the over on that one as well. I was on the Lagway hype train, man. I figured we were going to see him quite a bit, and it turns out that eventually became right as the season wore on.
Yep. So this is one I did not hit. Lagway 500 passing yards. As I said, I did not expect him to play as much as he did. I did not account for the injury. I went with the under, expecting him not to start so much. Passed for 1,610 yards. So yeah, he was way over 500 passing yards.
I had the over on this one, and I wrote down, I expect Lagway to play a lot at the end of the year, unfortunately, because unfortunately kind of meant that everything was going haywire, and it turns out that everything was going haywire, and he stabilized it all. So I'll get rid of the unfortunately there at the end, but I had the over on that one.
All right. Went with over under with the Gators average 175 rushing yards a game, 200.2 2 years ago. That was AR and Montreal and ETN in the backfield. So AR on his way out. Florida had 149.5 yards last season with those same two backs. I was torn on this one. I went under with 170 a game, and the Gators went under that as well by getting 156 per game, Will.
Yeah, I went under on this one, but it was Lagway was the wild card. And I think this is actually a really tough one next year, Dave, because with Anthony Richardson and Emory Jones, Florida was way up over 200 yards. So you put 175 up there over under. It's like, that was kind of tough. But with Kyle Trask in 2020, they were at 131, which really means that you need the quarterback to run, I think, to get up in that 175 to 200 yard range. And Lagway is going to bring that next year. So this is actually going to be a fun one to do next year, because I think it's going to be indicative of how Billy Napier feels about his backup quarterback, maybe in more ways than more than how he feels about Lagway, because obviously he saw what happens when Lagway goes down, and he saw what happens when Lagway's in there. And so I'm curious to see whether they're going to run him in this game against Tulane, but I'm also curious next year what they're going to do, because if you want to run the ball like that, it opens up so much stuff if your quarterback's willing to do it and able to do it. But you also have the risk of the injury, and an injury given Florida's schedule is going to be kind of sketchy. So took the under on that one, but already preparing for next year.
Yeah, I went barely under. So, but 156 for the Gators when the over-under was at 175. With any running back, averaged 15 carries a game. No running back did in 2022. Johnson had 9 with 115 total carries. ETN also had 9 on 118 carries. Then last season, Montreal had 12.6 a game. ETN had 12, so they were pretty even there too. Of course, coming into this year, Montreal was the most experienced in the deep running back room. Would that equal him getting more than 15 carries a game? So Johnson had 11 carries per game. Ball had 10 a game. Jacoby Jackson about 7 a game. So no running back hit 15 carries a game. I said Montreal Johnson would get it. I was wrong on that one.
Yeah, I took the under on this one. I've learned my lesson with Billy Napier. He just keeps running a different running back out there every drive, and the rotation may change a little bit. Maybe Ball wins the number 1 spot, and Montreal Johnson drops behind him, and Jackson's sitting there at third. But they're just going to rotate him through, and honestly, that probably pays off when you think about what happens at that position, right? Yeah. Montreal Johnson goes down; those other guys are ready to go. And, you didn't even mention Trayon Webb, who went out with an injury early in the season, who would have gotten a lot of these carries if he'd have been able to stay healthy. And so, Florida has a running back stable, even in this most recent recruiting class. They're bringing in a bunch of running backs, guys like Waltez Clark and some other folks like that too. So that's just the staple of what Napier's going to do. So I think you're going to have to lower that carries a game before I take the over, man, just because every year we end up in this conundrum. And every year, Billy Napier, this is the only year I think I haven't taken the over on this one, because I'm like, surely they're going to give the ball to ETN 20 times a game. And then, nope, just rotate him in every other drive.
Yeah, probably have to go. So Montreal had 11 this year. He had 12 last year. So with him gone, I think I probably will put it at 12 next year, looking ahead. So I think 12 will be a good number.
All right. We got to mark this down to make sure we don't make the same mistakes next year.
One I was way off on, any wide receiver with 65 catches Last season, Pearsall had 65. Wilson had 61. So you had two near it, one on it, one near it. Deeper at wide receiver this year, but I thought Trey Wilson would get to 65, and I know he'd get hurt as well. Injuries really did me in this year. So let's not, forget how those pop passes count here. I did go back and look. Trey Wilson was averaging about 5 receptions a game, so he probably would have gotten close if that would have continued. But Badger had 37, DK had 36, so nobody really, really close. You had that mid-stretch of the season, too, when Warner would play against Georgia and Texas. That slows a lot of this down. They still wouldn't have got near 60. But, it would have been interesting had the season played out in some ways like we thought it would. But Badger was the closest with 37, DK 36.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if Wilson and Mertz had stayed healthy, he probably gets it. So I had taken the over on this one too, kind of thinking that was what was going to happen, right? The little pop passes, the intermediate routes, all that sort of stuff that Mertz is really good at are the things that Wilson I sort of expected to be able to do. And honestly, the arrival of Elijah Badger is what made me confident in this one, because I assumed that Badger was going to allow Wilson to remain on the inside in the slot, and they were going to be able to continue getting him the ball over and over and over again. Wilson caught 61 balls in 10 games in 2023. And so, I was sitting there going, all right, they're going to give him like 10 touches a game as long as he stays healthy. But therein lies the problem, right? Is that a guy like Pearsall being able to stay healthy all year long is a rarity when you're getting him 65, 70 balls. I mean, the number of targets that Pearsall's getting, we're probably up around 80. And the other aspect is Florida has a much deeper wide receiver room now than they did 2 years ago as well, right? It was Pearsall and it was Wilson, and that was kind of it. And, you had Khalil Jackson out there and Marcus Burke, a much younger Marcus Burke out there. The wide receiver room's a lot deeper. So probably take that into account. Next year. 65 is kind of high on this one, but we both took the over, so clearly we took the bait, man.
Yeah, it would not be probably 50 next year, maybe not even that high. Heck, I don't know. All right, here we go. Continuing offense, 30 points per game. That's what we set it at. It seems to be a pretty good number given what what has played out here. Florida 29.5 in 2022, Billy Napier's first season, 28.4 last season. I went over and got this one wrong last year, and I was wrong again this year. The Gators go under 30 points per game once again with 28 points per game, Will.
Yeah, so I took the under on this one because Billy Napier didn't hire an offensive coordinator, and that seems to be the bugaboo again this season. He's basically sat right below 30 points per game all 3 years. And until they make a change there, I think that's probably where Florida ends up, which is depressing considering that Lagway's bringing all this hope in some capacity. So hopefully they make some changes there. Hopefully are able to get over the hump, and certainly a full season of DJ Lagway, I think, might bump that up. But, again, this is one of those Napierisms, right? He's going to rotate those running backs, and he's not going to be the guy who puts up 50 on Georgia when he's got the opportunity, like a Spurrier would or like a Meyer would. That's just not his personality. I mean, hell, even saw him apologize for the flag planting after the Florida State game at his press conference. And I'm just sitting there going, what would Steve Spurrier say? He probably would have had some sort of quip about macing him or something after the Ohio State-Michigan game where it had happened earlier and they had maced the players. Like, Spurrier would have had something out there like, well, like at least we didn't get maced while we were out there doing it. It's so a little bit different attitude, which I think in many ways leads to the offense being where it is.
Yeah. Well, what's up? Something happened to your camera. You got you're an avatar.
Uh-oh.
I mean, it looks fine, but
I was going to say, do I need to log out and log back in?
No, it's fine. We'll finish the episode with this. I mean, you don't have a funny face or anything. It looks okay. So.
It looks better than when I'm talking written live.
I mean, it's funny. You sound fine and everything. Just all of a sudden it froze. So, yeah.
Well, I guess it's time for a new computer, Dave.
Okay. Let's go to defense here. Defense, we set the over-under at 25 points per game. 27.5 last season of what the defense was giving up. So, thought the defense would be better this season. Then we got the over-under, got set to 25, and I said, I'm going to shave. I think they're going to shave off a field goal is what I said from last season against a tough schedule. So about 24 points per game. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Well, Will, 24.3 points per game for this defense. That's after the first 3 FBS opponents went above that, with Miami scoring 41, Texas A&M scoring 33, Mississippi State scoring 28, Georgia got 34, Texas got 49. But after those, Ole Miss was the highest in the last 3 games with 17 points in that game. So they did shave off a little bit on the defense compared to last year there for the Gators. So we set it at 25 points per game. The Gators were at 24.
Well, we did get help in that Florida State's offense somehow was worse than Samford. and so the extra cupcake on the schedule certainly did help. I took the under on this one too, more than anything because and so Florida was really good on success rate in 2023. And so I thought that might translate. And it turns out it didn't. The success rate allowed went up again. But the thing I pointed to was Ron Roberts. I thought he was going to have much more zone to restrict big plays. And he certainly did that, especially later in the year. And some of that was tied to guys like Banks being able to get pressure, but some of that was just tied to Florida just said, look, we're going to let you, like the LSU game, we're going to let you convert every third down you got. But we don't think you're going to be able to do that the whole way down the field. And, you wound up with LSU running 94 plays or whatever it was and having 45 minutes time of possession, but Florida's able to come out and keep them down there. So, yeah, I took the under on this one. Honestly, this was one where I was like, the defense can't be bad again, can it? And after that Miami and A&M game, I was like, I'm never allowed to utter those words ever again. But the Ron Roberts effect did take over. They played a lot more zone this year. They blitzed a lot less. They trusted their defensive line, and by the end of the year, defensive line started to make a big impact. And we'll get to that on the next step.
Yeah, we said over under 25 sacks. It's been said at 30 sacks in the past. The Gators got 22 last season. I went with the over with 27 sacks, and Florida produced 38 sacks on the season, Will. So even got well over the 30 we used to set it at. Really, really come on at the end of the year.
Yeah, I went under just because I was to prove it, right? It was one of those things where I'm like, just prove it. And I expected them to be bend but don't break. I expected them to get some turnovers, but I didn't really expect them to get a lot of pressure from the front four. And quite honestly, after that Miami game, we were both sort of looking at each other behind the scenes going, well, guess we should have set that number even lower. and then, like you said, I mean, look, when you get – how many sacks do they have against Florida State? Like 7? That certainly has an impact on your overall numbers. But like you said, the last 3, 4, 5 games, the defense was getting consistent pressure, consistently making the quarterback uncomfortable. Havoc rates really, really high. So it wasn't just that they were getting sacks. It was that the sacks were coming because they were making the quarterback uncomfortable. Guys like Jackson Dart were throwing interceptions. He was seeing ghosts by the end of that game. So great job by the Florida defense. Great job by Roberts and Armstrong. Good job by guys like Banks and Cam Jackson and some of the defensive ends as well. And hopefully we continue it in 2025.
All right, let's continue on defense. We set the over-under for turnovers at 15. Only 7 last season, 3 interceptions and 4 fumble recoveries. Had 22 turnovers 2 seasons ago, so we put it at 15 because it wasn't out of the question for a bounce back. I went over with 18, and Florida had 11 interceptions and 11 fumbles for a total of 22 again. So well over the 15, Will. Gators with 22 turnovers.
Yeah, I had the over on this one. I thought that the switch to a reliance on zone was going to free up some safeties lurking behind the play. And if you think about it, especially in that game against Ole Miss, that's really kind of what happened. Bryce Thornton gets the 2 interceptions where he's just kind of playing center field and Dart throws it up and he's able to get it. A couple more times that happened, but the fumbles were really a huge deal as well. I mean, they got a couple of fumbles, I think, against LSU and we're really able to just create havoc, and that's the word I'm going to go to in any sort of season recap. Is the havoc that the defense caused was significant. And so I had the over on this one. I thought they'd be able to get that with some of their defensive backs. I did not think they were going to put the kind of pressure on the quarterback that they did, but obviously once they were able to do that, then the ball goes out even quicker and is going to give those safeties the ability to lurk behind the play.
Man, I mean, the FSU game as well. All those fumbles.
Yeah, a few fumbles in that one.
Really helping out there as well. So,
they're terrible.
That was so much fun. All season long. The gift that just kept on giving. And they kept giving it away. Yeah, do that for that night in Tallahassee. Rank for third down conversions. We went with this one as well. 35th last season. So a big rise for the Gators with 35.6%. We asked, would they rank higher or lower? Higher being the lowest number, like rankings work. I said, I think they will rise more here. So I'll go with a ranking higher in this category and take it near 33% for third down defense for the Gators. Nowhere close to that. The defense was much worse on third down, giving up about 41%, and that ranked 84th in the country, Will. So the over-under was, would Florida rank higher or lower? They ranked much, much, much lower.
Yeah, I had them ranking lower on this one because, and I have written down right here, expect the defense to be much more bend but don't break than it's been the past few seasons. And so that was one of those where I was like, oh, yeah, like, they're just going to give up third downs. And man, I mean, they lost this one for us lost this one for you specifically in the LSU game. I mean, what were they, like 13 for 20 or something like that? I mean, it's a good thing you didn't have fourth down conversions in there too, because I think they were like 4 of 4 on fourth downs. So the good news is that this does not really, especially because of the way Florida was sort of positioning their defense, this isn't indicative of how a defense is playing. In fact, I would say Florida's third down conversion probably went down as they got deeper and deeper into the season. But that honestly was because they were starting to rely on their front four. Yeah. And sometimes the front four doesn't get there. And when they don't, you're able to convert. But man, they got there quite a bit as well. So not disappointed in this one, but this is one of those that like pings back and forth year after year.
Yeah.
So, you'll set it at 35th. Next year we'll be like 4th, but the defense will still be terrible because it turns out that like third and Grantham is just a general frustration at the defense not being good. It's not necessarily just third down conversions.
What is Mike Gundy thinking?
I mean, they made him take less money, so he's decided to protest.
Protest and hire Todd Grantham as DC.
I mean, hey, he decided he was going to hire somebody who had a worse hairstyle than he did. I think is sort of where he was. I don't even know, man. Like I still use the meme. Like somebody years ago tweeted a picture of a golfer who's just going, and right behind him is Todd Grantham. And I still use that.
That was the Bryson DeChambeau and Koepka.
Yeah. And so I still tweet that out whenever I'm frustrated about something going on with Florida football. So, I have one just fundamental rule when it comes to football, hires, fires, like whether you're going to make decisions, those sorts of things. It's one of the things that sort of led me to say like that Lagway playing every 3 drives was ridiculous. It's what does my opponent not want me to do? Or what does my opponent laugh at me when I do? And I just don't want to do that. So like Florida fans are all snickering that Todd Grantham's going to Oklahoma State. And look, Grantham, he actually isn't a terrible defensive coordinator.
Yeah, right. I know,
He's just not a difference maker. And so for a team that went 3-9 to bring him in, but that's the power of the mullet, man. You got to be confident to have that mullet. And so I blame it on the mullet.
Here we go. So some superlatives here that we also throw in with our season predictions, the ultimate game changer. I said Trey Wilson was too obvious, so I wanted to go somewhere else with that. And boy, I hit Elijah Badger, Will.
Yeah, I didn't do so well on these. I did great on the over-unders. These I missed quite a bit. So I had Tank Hawkins. I thought that with Etienne ETN leaving, Hawkins was going to get an opportunity on punt returns and kick returns. And that one of Florida's biggest weaknesses last year was special teams, that they were going to bring in Joe Houston and he was going to really bring somebody out there who was dynamic. And then it just turned out that Shamir DK is really, really good at making decisions on fair catches and actually pretty sneaky when it comes to getting good field position. So DK probably would have been the kick, would have been the pick there. I just expected them to get something out of a burner on special teams, and we just didn't see that.
Yeah, for Badger, I said it was more catch and run, and look, I was surprised. We saw it versus. Oh, was it LSU? I mean, was it? Oh, what game was it? Ole Miss or F? I think it was Ole Miss. He actually had one pop pass, and it was a little catch and run, and he had made some. I would thought we'd saw more of that out of Badger, but no, it was more of the downfield threat there. So look, I think
I'm still trying to figure out how Badger's always open downfield, but he got caught by Samford at the one.
He should have had like 3 or 4 more touchdowns in the year.
I mean, it's just he and Lagway really are like the Jalen Hurts. Like you get it down to the one, and then like all the people who have Hurts in fantasy are always excited because he's got like 75 rushing touchdowns, but he threw for like 102 yards in the game. It's
all part of the plan.
Anyway.
But yeah, so Badger I think could be up there. DK could be up there as well. We're looking at offense. So for defense, I went Jordan Castell. Well, I said the second year would pay off. Oops.
I mean,
don't get me wrong. He wasn't terrible. I mean, I think he did get better as the season went on, as the defense did. But safety play was pretty poor toward the beginning of the year. He didn't take that step I thought he would take.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, right? I think Castell was not a difference maker in the way that we needed him to be and that we wanted him to be. But I don't think he was terrible. Though, if you look at his PFF rating for the overall year, he's 58.2. So, okay, never mind. I take that back. He was much better 2 years ago than he was this year. And I'll be interested.
How much different was it early season, late season? If you
not much.
Not much.
He played well against LSU, played well against Florida State, played terribly against Texas and Ole Miss, and sort of average against Georgia, Kentucky, bad against Tennessee. So, even when the defense was taking a step up, PFF didn't have him playing all that great. And look, I mean, Florida's going to find some ways to upgrade at that position this season. So, we'll see where that goes. So the guy I had was Devin Moore. I really thought that Moore was finally going to put it together. They brought in my cousin Tyler Miles as the strength coach, so I thought that was going to help. And then he's been really good when he's been on the field. Yeah, and he's actually the guy. If you start looking at, he was bad to start with against Miami, A&M, Mississippi State, and UCF, and then he was good against Tennessee, excellent against Kentucky, excellent against Georgia, but then injured again. So Florida got good play out of him when he was in, but they just didn't get enough play out of him. And so, I can't call him the defensive game changer. I mean, I think if I was going to pick a defensive back, it'd be Bridges, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. Bridges, Caleb Banks, Tyreek Sapp. That's probably where I'd go with the way the season played out for the game changers on defense. So, breakout player, both sides of the ball. I said I know everybody wants to go new faces at running back, but I went Trayon Webb, so that didn't turn out well with his injury. And on defense, I did get this one right, and of course my bias actually helped me here. But I stayed in 904, and breakout player I went with Pup Howard.
Yeah, so you've been on Pup Howard like since the day he was born, like he came out in the hospital and you're like, Pup, it's Pup, like come to Florida, and that patience has paid off for you because he was awesome this year. I think certainly got what was a high ankle sprain at some point along the way, and that slowed him down a little bit, but a huge addition. You think about him and Jaden Robinson, those guys roaming around with Miles Graham, with Aaron Childs, and even with Shamar James the next few years. Florida's pretty set at the linebacker position. So on offense, I had Arliss Boardingham, so he's transferring out. So great pick there by Will. And then defense, I had Moore first, but then I had TJ Searcy. So Searcy was good, but not great. Like it wasn't. The reasoning though was, I think, pretty solid. Is he made the All SEC freshman team? Those guys often take big steps forward in year 2. So actually, I think that still holds. If you ask me, is Searcy going to take a step forward in year 3? I think, like we sort of saw from Tyreek Sapp this year, like we saw with Caleb Banks this year, I think this might be an opportunity in 2025 for a guy like Searcy to really sort of step forward. I'll be interested to see what he does in the bowl game. You think about like guys who get extra reps, guys who go out there with their motors running.
Well, I just hope he's on the roster.
Well, me too. But we'll see. Thanks for harshing my buzz there, Dave.
Transfer portal taketh, transfer portal giveth. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, he would be somebody I'd be looking forward to. I mean, I thought he played well toward the end of the year as well, when that whole defensive line took a step. So that's just a group I think we have to watch there, Will.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I sort of go to guys like McCray.
Yeah.
Like those guys, you expect them to be game changers next year. Like as a true freshman, you get some snaps, you get to show what you can do a little bit, you get to make some mistakes, like all that sort of stuff. Next year, full year in the program, if you're a 5-star, it's time to excel. So
correct.
I would expect some of those guys are going to lose jobs to guys like McCray if they're ready to step up.
All right, best new face. This was transfers and or freshmen. And look, I brought up the transfers, Elijah Badger and Pup Howard, so that kind of took care of it for me. But for freshmen, I said I was torn between one of the freshman running backs, Jaden Ball or KD Daniels, and LJ McCray on the defense. So, but I ultimately went LJ McCray, but I think it would have been Jaden Ball.
Yeah, I went with McCray as well here. So clearly this section next year, I've put a hex on people because I mean, McCray wasn't bad, right? But,
no, yeah.
But he wasn't somebody that I said, oh, this guy is like it. Like I expected there to be an opportunity for him to make an impact, kind of like Harold Perkins did a couple years ago at LSU. And that just wasn't something that we saw. Now, I don't think that's necessarily fair to say, hey, you got to go out there and play like one of the better 5-stars that we've seen over the last few years. And, but if you look at his PFF, 61.3 overall, he had a good game against Stanford, good game against A&M. Everything else was kind of average overall. So again, got your feet wet. And the question is going to be now, how do you take that experience? How do you take maybe what's a little bit of a humbling experience and transfer that into being a dominating player next year? And then from a transfer perspective, boy, did I miss. I had Asa Turner was the guy that I picked to change it there. I said, like, here's what I wrote at the beginning of the year. I said, Florida safeties have been capital A awful the past 3 seasons. Turner brings some stability, even if not a star, to a position that has been so far below average that average play will feel like a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh my goodness. And then he got hurt against Miami. We never saw him again.
Yeah. So I had Castell as, one of a game changer. You had Turner kind of the same.
Well, if you want to know why our defense was bad the first half of the year, like you don't have to look too much further than safeties.
Right. So we ended it record prediction. I said I went 8-4. I leaned 7-5, but I went 8-4 with losses to Tennessee, which I got, Georgia, which I got, Texas, which I got, and the fourth loss would be Ole Miss. So that didn't happen. Well, I mean, I had 8-4 with the losses not coming until the Tennessee game. Crazy how the season played out. Florida had 2 losses, of course, in the first 3 games. Ended up 7-5. Crazy. Just if just how it all played out. If you would have picked 8-4, if you would have picked 7-5, you probably would have like kind of picked it in this vein where Florida didn't lose early in the season but lost late in the season. But it was the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's funny. So not a surprise that Will was more cynical than you were coming into this year. I had Florida at 6-6, but the logic actually is kind of fun to read. So I thought LSU and Florida State would take a step back, but would still probably get the wins over Florida. I thought Central Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee are better than the experts think. So missed on Central Florida and Kentucky, but hit on Tennessee there. I think Georgia and Texas are in a class by themselves. And then I said Ole Miss and Texas A&M are toss-ups. And so, if I'd have just gotten one of the LSU or FSU's there, and certainly I don't think any of us saw Florida State just like completely falling apart. Though there is a cautionary tale to be told there about the transfer portal. We were talking about that earlier. That there's something to be said for when you go all in there. That does leave you exposed on the back end. So Adam 6-6, obviously happy that they went 7-5, happy that we've learned a ton. And it's funny because, we basically had that breakout or the best new face, and neither one of us, like, we were just like, it's not fair to put Lagway in there.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it turns out he was the best new face. Like, he won that one, wins the season, wins the off season. And, boy, does he make it exciting for what we got coming up in this bowl game and in 2025.
The over-unders will be really fun next year. I can tell you that.
It's fun every year. It's so funny. Like, it's funny because, you hear people talk about the bowl games at 3:30 on a Friday. And I mean, come on, do you really want to go to work the Friday before Christmas break? Like, no one's actually at work. Don't pretend you're at the bar anyway. And then, and in some ways, like if this was a game against Michigan or a game against like a Syracuse, or like, it might give us something more to compare against. But really, Florida's had so much trouble just maintaining momentum. Like, to get a win in a bowl game, to be 8-5, to go into the offseason with nothing but positive vibes is, to me, you couldn't think of anything better for Napier. You couldn't think of anything better for the program. I don't think that the guys, I think they've had a chip on their shoulder for so long that at some point having that chip on your shoulder kind of gets a little bit, it can make you bitter. It can make it to where you don't work as hard. And hopefully the positive vibes have the opposite effect, where these guys are all, doing the midnight runs and all the weightlifting and all the stuff they need to do because of exactly what Banks said, right? He's coming back because he thinks they have a shot to be special. And that's one of the cool parts coming in 2025 is, whether Florida is special or not, there's hope this offseason that they have the opportunity to be special. And it's been a long time since we've been able to say that in Gainesville.
Well, it's funny, kind of going to your point there. Maybe, Florida just catches a break that it didn't catch 2 years ago. Remember, Florida was 6-6 and got the Las Vegas Bowl going against a 10-win Oregon State team. And now get a Tulane team that's going to be, fighting through portal players and, trying to piece a depth chart together for a Florida team on the rise.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the way it goes, right? I mean, Florida, that game, Anthony Richardson wasn't playing, right? I mean, we got to see Jack Miller play quarterback there for against Oregon State, and now it sort of goes the other way, right? Is it Tulane's going to have their quarterback missing, and Florida's going to have their star quarterback slinging it around everywhere, and so those games do matter though. Like when you lose by 40 points in a bowl game, like it just sort of casts a pall over the entire offseason, and you're sitting there spending the entire offseason explaining away the loss rather than focusing on what's coming. And look, there's been a lot of talk, and especially early in the season and even after the Texas loss, that had been a really long time since Napier had gotten a win in October, and that they had lost the 5 straight to end the season last year. And so, hey, they might do it again this year, and to do it 2 years in a row and all that sort of stuff. So to come out of this with a 4-game winning streak heading into next year, knowing that Miami has to replace their quarterback, knowing that you sort of get that non-conference game to start things off, can really set the tone for 2025 there really early in the season, I think has to be exciting for the players, has to be exciting for the staff, and has to be exciting for the fans. I mean, I am looking forward to this offseason in a way I haven't looked forward to an offseason in a long time. And, Lagway is a huge part of it, but part of it is just that there's hope on the horizon that we could have a really special Florida season. And whether that ends up in the playoff or not, it's at least one of those things where there's a possibility that it can. And I mean, we spent all offseason going, if you're expecting Florida to make the playoffs this year, you're crazy. And it turns out Florida didn't make the playoffs. So hopefully next year we can come in and say, if you're saying that Florida can't make the playoffs, you're crazy. And, next year, this time, I expect to be, coming down to Gainesville to watch Florida take on somebody in a first-round playoff game.
Yeah, hopefully a year from now, that's what we're doing here. We're talking about a playoff matchup, and hey, I know at least for one thing, when the national championship is crowned, and we haven't been able to do this and really enjoy this, and not that rankings mean a whole lot, but it's still better than the alternative. after the morning after the national championship game, and those way too early polls start coming out, you're gonna find Florida on there.
Oh yeah. It turns out when you have a transformative quarterback with a QB rating up over up over 170 as a true freshman, it's like people start respecting you real quick there. So look, Napier's still got a lot of work to do. The team still has a lot of work to do. The roster isn't even close to what it's going to be coming into next year. But the key foundational piece is sitting there. And with a guy like Banks coming back, a key foundational piece on the defense is there. And you think about the offensive line and sort of the way they developed this year. Like there's going to be a lot of the foundational pieces coming back there on the offensive line. Hayden Hanson's still going to be back. So you've got a lot of guys who have a lot of experience, a lot of output, but quality output, right? Like guys who've won some games now. Yeah. It's not, hey, we got 80% of our roster back from a team that went 5-7. Woo! It's like, no, we've got 80% of the roster coming back and those guys are on a 4-game winning streak. And so that, yeah, man, it'll be nice to sit there and go, I mean, I'm guessing it'll be like 18th, 19th, probably in that range, but beats the crap out of what it has been the past few years when we haven't even been in the conversation. Look, preseason polls mean nothing, right?
Right.
You still got to go out and earn it. And as Alabama found, sometimes you got to show up when you play Vanderbilt. And if you don't, it means that you're left out when the ACC turns into some weird Clemson hex. And you got to protect against that next year, and hopefully Florida can pull out a 10-2 and get us into the playoff, man.
All right, there we go. So, good stuff. Like I said, jam-packed episode here of Gators Breakdown. We got Frozen Wheel here on the episode, so that's pretty good. Hey, I'm just glad the audio still, was good. So, if you're watching on YouTube, you see it. If you're not, you don't even know what I'm talking about. But
it's like a South Park episode where Cartman puts a puts a picture of himself in front of the Zoom meeting and then just goes off and does whatever he wants. So this is AI Will answering on the back end.
There we go.
It's not really a human. Which, I mean, some people have accused me of that anyway. So
Okay, there we go. All right, good stuff. Will Miles, you can find his work at Read Reaction. Will, like I said, you got some recruiting articles and you got some playoff stuff up there too, right?
Yeah, I had a recruiting article last week after early signing day, so people can read that and criticize me for it. And then today I put up an article talking about the lessons to learn from what the committee did this year, because I think there's a lot to learn about. There's been some talk about non-conference games and all that sort of stuff, but I actually think the thing to look at next year, and this is the thing I'm going to sort of be honing in on, is the games Florida has on the road. So if you look at the teams that struggled, so Alabama lost on the road to Vandy, on the road to Oklahoma. So when you have those sort of games that you expect to win, but they're on the road, inevitably those end up being the ones that turn into battles. And so if you're looking at Florida saying, how do they get to 10-2? I think you really got to take the road games into effect and sort of understand who are they actually playing when they're away from the swamp. And that'll sort of tell you what's going to happen next year and what Florida's path to a playoff berth is going to be. So look, I mean, you can lose 2 games and still be in, which is so weird to say for college football, but Alabama lost 2 games to in-conference opponents who were at or below 500. So I'm not really feeling all that sorry for the Tide after the past 20 years there. So we'll normally I sort of kind of pull for the SEC, but I'm okay with SMU being in it this year. And we'll but I do think there's some lessons for Florida to learn, and that just being a name isn't going to get you there. That you better take care of business, especially when it's against an inferior opponent on the road.
All right, well, kind of on that note, too, Wednesday night, the SEC will release next year's schedule. We already know the opponents for Florida. We just don't know when and where for most of it. So the SEC will release that Wednesday. So I'll be on the heels of that with the episode of Gators Breakdown, kind of going through the schedule a bit next year. So we will see when Florida has to go on the road and play Ole Miss and LSU. And
can we have 7 games this year where the team we're playing is coming off a bye? That'd be great.
That was, Hey, it didn't really matter too much, I guess, for Ole Miss to did it. So, all right, good stuff, Will.
Yeah, man, always fun. Hopefully, I'll be able to be there more than just in spirit next time we get together.
Sounds good. Read Reaction. That's where you can find Will Miles. I am the host of Gators Breakdown right here David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining me on this episode of Gators Breakdown.